Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Ray Hall Tech. Today I'm going to record part 2 in my series of restoring my ComputerLand BC88. I had a few challenges, so let's get right into this video and start talking about what I needed to do. At the end of part 1, you saw that the computer was completely put back together. Well, I've taken it apart and I've been doing some troubleshooting off camera trying to figure out what could be wrong with this computer. First of all, it came with a monochrome graphics card, and that's this card here. This card, I don't have a monochrome monitor. I can't hook anything up to it. I couldn't get it to work. So I replaced the monochrome card with this CGA card. And outside of being able to get the monitor to sync and get a display that showed that the card was working, all I could get was a bunch of distorted screens. And you can see it was varying color, distorted text, so I was beginning to wonder if I might have a RAM issue. So this, again, is the CPU board of the ComputerLand BC88. And right here there are dip switches. When these dip switches were set from my home, switch 4 was on and switch 5 was off. And in experimenting with the dip switch settings, I discovered that once 4 was off and 5 was on, in this configuration that it is now, suddenly the CGA card would start displaying. I have to assume these dip switches do something to the computer to set its display output mode. I can't find any documentation on this computer onto what I should be doing with these dip switches here. So I'm going to keep looking and hopefully I'll be able to find that in the future. Alright, so the next card, this is the memory card, and you can see I have 4 banks of memory. These are all filled up to maximum, giving me 640K of memory on this computer. The floppy controller, the serial I/O, and the parallel I/O are all built into this card. So this computer can't boot without both the CPU card and this I/O card installed. And I did find a Korean website that I used Google Translate to be able to read, and it shows that these dip switches are for the memory banks, and then these dip switches, I couldn't find anything what I should do with them. And then the circuit board has this one silk screened. It lets you set your COM port I/O address and whether or not you're COM 1 or COM 2. And unfortunately, I'm not able to find much more information about this board. I'm not going to take out the MFM controller. It's the same as most other controllers. You have your drive 0 and drive 1 connector and then your other controller here. I don't know enough about MFM to know which controller is which, so that's someplace that I'm going to have the ability to learn. And then this card is the CGA card. That is all that is in this computer. So let me go ahead and slide this floppy drive out. I was worried that it didn't work because when it powered on, it'll do a light seek for sure, but the heads don't move. Once I got the computer up and running, I was able to format a 360K floppy, transfer the system files to it, and copy some files to it, create a config sys and an auto execbat, and this computer drive worked perfectly fine. So I now have a DOS version 5 boot disk that matches the version of DOS that is on this computer. When this computer originally came out, it's my understanding that it had a custom version of DOS 2.2, and that people recommended using DOS 3 on this. I have an LED that's wired straight to the front of the drive controller. And then here I have the LED that was originally connected to it in this computer that goes to this front board. But unfortunately this front board is corroded from battery leakage, and at the moment I can't get the battery, the turbo light, or the hard drive light to work. And I don't have keys for it, so I don't know if the key switch works either. So that's an area I'm going to have to fix in the future. Let me go ahead and get this slipped right back in place. So this hard drive is now mounted. On these older computers, there's actually some ground wires that are screwed into the bottom of the case, and this ground wire plugs into a peg on the hard drive. On the pin side, you usually have a notch that keeps you from plugging this in backwards, but there's a red stripe that marks pin 1. And on this floppy drive, you can see in this connector that there is a notch that lines up here to keep you from plugging it in backwards. I've run into a few of these cables that don't have that notch, so you can see there's a pin 2 marked here and pin 34 marked here. So when I plug this in, I want to make sure the red cable is towards pin 1. If I plug that in backwards, the light on the floppy drive will typically turn on solid and not shut back off, indicating that I plugged the cable in upside down. So that takes care of all of that. I have a couple extra power cords, which I do not need in this computer. So let me just make sure I get all the cables tucked in a way that they will not interfere with the case when I slide the case on the top. Alright, so now the keyboard connector from the motherboard is a pass-through because the BC88 doesn't have a motherboard. It just uses a backplane, and then it uses the CPU card. So I have to plug in the keyboard to the CPU card with one cable. Then on this cable, it's my understanding that two of these wires are the battery that power the real-time clock. Two of these wires are used for signaling the turbo mode, and when turbo is enabled, it's supposed to turn on the white light. And then the other two cables are for the lock, but again, I found a picture on that Korean website, and I'm not 100% sure how it ties together. But let me go ahead and get that cable plugged in. And luckily this plastic is not brittle at all. Okay. So here is the LED from the front of the case that I'm just going to set down. So that's the red LED. I'm going to leave that sitting here because I can't get that LED to work. So the lead I ran from the hard drive, I have two pins right here, and I know positive is towards the back. The next thing, I have this Microsoft Intellimouse, and you can see, maybe, hopefully, let me get a little bit closer to the camera, see if that'll focus. But it actually says it's serial mouse port compatible. So this is a PS2 mouse, but it has a serial port to PS2 port adapter. And because this is the Microsoft mouse with that serial port compatibility, I can actually get this mouse to work on the serial port. And I've already tested it once, and it was working just fine. Let's turn on this monitor. And before the CGA card sends out a sync, the monitor is just white, so you should see white screen flickering right now. Then I can turn on the computer. Okay, I'm going to stand right back here, and you'll be able to see my light reflected and me reflected in the screen. But right now the computer is identifying the hard drive. If the hard drive is not identified, it'll give a 1701 error here before it gives you the BIOS and computer memory count. So now the computer looks like it may boot just fine. You can see the hard drive light is working, so I did not plug that in backwards. Interlink is up. So from the time that I got this computer, the battery in it to keep the real-time clock was dead. So I always thought all computers always required you to have the date and time entered manually. So here in the auto exec bat, there is a date command and a time command, and I'm just going to hit enter on those to finish the boot sequence. And then this computer was put together by Western Computer and Support Services in Greeley, Colorado, where I grew up. Alright, so now we're in this file manager. On a monochrome display, this works fine, just right out of the box. But with the CGA card, it defaults to 40 column mode. So if I type in mode 80, and switch to 80 column mode, then I can type 1 and hit enter, and it'll bring back up the menu. And now you can see that the menu looks fine. I can modify the auto exec bat to change that, but growing up, this is the experience I had with my computer. I knew right here that my computer was up and ready to go. This computer has DOS version 5 on it. It has a Learn to Type program. It has WordPerfect version 5.1 for DOS. Lotus 123, and I used that a lot for school with my dot matrix printer when I was in high school. There's a database program called My Treasures, which I will not open on camera. It is full of information. It's got about 400 contacts of people. From the reason we bought this, you can see it's called Barking Dog Expeditions. We raced sled dog teams, and that database is everybody who was part of the Colorado Mountain Mushers Club. The next thing that it has is Qbasic. My first programming experience was actually in Apple Basic on an Apple II. But once I programmed at school in Apple Basic, I came here and I noticed Qbasic, and I started using Qbasic, and I started learning to program in Qbasic. This has a version of C++. All I know is that the executable is called ned, so you can type ned space and then some file name. If it doesn't exist, it'll create a new C file. If it exists, it'll open that C file. And I didn't know C back then, so if there's anything on this computer, I don't know what it is. There's a games menu, but it doesn't work. There's no games on this computer. We purely used it for work purposes. I'm going to hit escape to exit to DOS, and I'm going to say yes. And then I'm going to go back just a little bit. Let me see what that looks like on the camera. It's kind of small. I'm going to try and zoom in. Oh, there you go. I now have some distortion on the screen, so I don't know if that's coming from the keyboard, the computer itself. Most of the capacitors on this computer are tantalum capacitors. They're not the electrolytic capacitors that leak, but there are a few of those. So you can see now the screen is messed up. So there may be some more work that I have to do in that area. Let me go ahead and, oh, there is some of that CGA distortion that I was talking about. I showed you a few pictures of that earlier in a clip. And let's make sure it's not just because I moved the computer and the cable came loose. This keyboard is a little weird for me. It is an IBM Model F. Let me drop it down. So you can see that the layout isn't quite the same as a modern keyboard. So I often hit the tilde key instead of the enter key. So it makes it kind of hard for me to use this computer. But if I type in WP, WordPerfect will open up. And this will highlight another problem I have with this computer. I don't know if it's my Alt key isn't working or something like that, but I am unable to navigate once I open WordPerfect. I may have put the keyboard together wrong. This is programmed to use a floppy disk, and I only have one floppy disk formatted right now, so I'm going to cancel that. There's no other version of WordPerfect running. Like I said, the computer keeps locking up when I'm trying to run WordPerfect. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this old backup file. And then WordPerfect will launch up. So here I am. And like if I hit F3, you can see it's not doing anything. It won't bring up help. I can hit Alt F. It won't do anything. Alt E. I can't type. I can't do anything. And that happens every time I launch WordPerfect, which is why it keeps asking me if there's another copy running. And again, I'm afraid that might be the hard drive. All right, let me reboot the computer again here. All right, I'm going to hit enter a couple of times. Okay, let's get out of this menu. Oops, I was faster than the computer. All right. So one problem that I'm having, if I type an edit right now and hit enter, the computer will lock up every time. As an experiment, I tried to run Qbasic as well. It works just like edit, and you can see it also looks like it's locking up here as well. I do have an EGA card that I want to restore. It has a bit of rust on it, but EGA Mode 1 will work fine with the CGA monitor because the timings are the same. Mode 2 EGA will not because there's a little bit different in the timings, the frequencies that the monitor will pick up. But my MDA card and my EGA card both default to 80 column mode, while this CGA card defaults to 40 column mode. And once I switch to the right mode, Qbasic and edit should work fine. Alright, so let's do mode 80. And now let's type Qbasic. Alright, so there you can see my open command works. So my alt key is working. Let me go back. Yeah, see, my tab key is not working. So if I hit alt, I go to D. Okay, now let's alt D again. Let's go to DOS. And then we're going to go alt F to bring up files. And let's load nibbles instead of gorillas. So this is the Snake version that came with Qbasic in DOS 5, as far as I know, because it was preloaded on the computer. And it's in the DOS directory, so I've always assumed that. Alright, so let's go ahead and Shift F5 to run this bad boy. Let me put on a 1. Increase game speed? Sure, why not? Because we're not going to be playing that long. And I have a color monitor. And here's where you can see the computer should be running at 4.77 megahertz right now. There is a file that came with the ComputerLand to boost it to 8 megahertz. I've seen some debug commands that are supposed to turn on and off the 8 megahertz, and I've seen some files that people have written to try and make it work, but I need to do a little bit more research on that. Alright, so we're going to hit space. And this keyboard is a Model F, so it doesn't have arrow keys. You have to use the number keys. And CGA graphics are kind of unique. On an RGB monitor, in certain graphic modes, you could only display 4 colors because of the 16 kilobyte memory limit that a CGA card has. But if you use the composite output, with some trickery and pixel colorations, you could actually display 16 colors on a composite display. So CGA is kind of cool in that the RGB mode gives you real crisp characters for business applications and business use, but using a composite monitor for home use gave you those cool game colors for home use. So I'm going to hit space because I died. And I'm not quite sure how to get out of this. If I have to play all my lives or not. If I do, I will cut the video short. Alright, so no, I do not want to play again. Press any key to continue. Alright, so Alt FX. So my Alt key definitely works. So maybe it's my Tab key that's broken. I don't know. See, I'm hitting Tab and nothing's happening. Yeah. So let's try and open up Edit. So I'm going to open. I want to go back to so this is the config sys. Alright, I don't want interlink running. So let's just rem that out. I don't care about those other things. I don't know why you would have DOS equals UMB. I only have 640K. There's no upper memory blocks for it to install to. Okay, then let's go. Alright, so we got echo off. We're setting some paths. The prompts, I do not want to set the directory command to /W. Yeah, let's go ahead and load the mouse at boot so that I have access to it. And again, this always had date and time in it, and I don't need the menu to boot, but to help us out, let's go to mode 80, and then we'll clear the screen. Alright. So Control-Alt-Delete worked. It rebooted the computer. Okay, we're gonna enter our fake new date and time. Alright, so now we're in mode 80 right from the get-go. Let's see if that fixes the issue with WordPerfect, and my assumption about bad files or something like that is incorrect. Let's go ahead, let's not do, let me cancel that. There's nothing else running, and we're going to delete that backup file. Oh, what did I do? Old backup, let's delete it. Getting ahead of the computer again. Looks about the same to me. F3 does nothing. But I have mouse control. So maybe it's not locked up, but I just don't remember how to access the menus. Huh. Alright. Well, that's good to know. So maybe I'm not having as many issues as I thought. And we are not going to save that. Exit WordPerfect. Yes. We'll look and see if there's any files on it later. Alright, so let's go... I believe it was just 1, 2, 3. Alright. So this is Lotus 1, 2, 3. I believe, yep, it's blue here, but I think I always saw it as amber on my old monochrome display because I had an amber display. So you hit the / key on the question mark. That's how you get the menu in Lotus 1, 2, 3. Do I want to quit? Yes, I want to quit. All right. So with that, my computer is running, and now I should be able to reboot here. Let's watch it one more time, come up to not use that menu system. It should dump me straight to the DOS prompt going forward. Alright. With that, the computer is fully restored. It should be ready to go with a few exceptions. For example, I have to fix that board up front, get that running, but WordPerfect 5.1, Lotus 1, 2, 3, my treasures, all of those things are working. And with that, I can start to gather up some of my old software and start making use of this computer. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.